Welcome to another episode of Complete Developer Podcast, the podcast by coders for coders about all aspects of creating your best life as a developer.
I'm Will, the accomplished developer, author, and software architect.
And I'm Beej, the journeyman developer sharing my journey in development.
Complete Developer Podcast is supported by listeners like you. We are now on Patreon at www.patreon.com/Complete Developer Podcast.
Knowledge silos happen when different parts of a team understand different parts of a system and don't understand other parts of that system. It's a natural state of system growth, but eventually it gets in the way of innovation. In this episode, we're going to discuss how knowledge silos develop, their symptoms, and how to overcome them, as well as when you need to do so. But before we get started, Will, what's been siloing you lately?
Well, I kind of feel like AWS today, put me in a silo and told me to go to the bathroom in a corner because US East 1 went down or had equipment problems. I don't know if they actually completely went down, but that was a pretty bad hair day because that's where our stuff is.
Yeah.
It's been a really long day. I'm just like, I'm completely cooked. I actually was relieved when I got done with work today and just worked on my Russian homework because it wasn't that hard. That's where my mind was at this point. So yeah, that was loads of fun. How about you?
Oh, dude, life has been a bit hectic lately. No joke. Just go, go, go. Not so much work. Work's been pretty good. It's been steady, but it's been good. We did have a similar thing about a week or so ago with Microsoft Azure going down. So the nice thing is that just affected development because I don't think we have anything in production there yet. We're in the process of moving. So it might have been one or two things that were down, but the big thing that affected was development and testing. So that was fun. We had a big conference this past weekend at church. Well, actually, it was just an all-day conference on Saturday. I think I was at the church other than a trip to Starbucks, I was at the church from about 7:45 until about 7:45. So about 12 hours. Yeah, because we had our church service that night too. And so I stuck around and helped clean up and set up. And then I've been working on the creative team camera because we have a camera for recording stuff, a video camera. I've been working on that, trying to figure stuff out, learning different things about it. So yeah, that was fun. Had a friend from Virginia come in. He was going to the conference we had at church, and so he stayed with me this weekend. That was a lot of fun. It was kind of neat having someone else in the house, someone to sit and talk to in the mornings, while drinking coffee and stuff. That was kind of cool. It was like having a roommate for a few days.
They leave.
Yeah, but they leave. Yeah. So, but I'll be honest with you, he's kind of tall. Like, I think he's 6'7". And so when I offered to let him stay here, I was thinking, oh yeah, I've got the futon. It's, it's a full size bed, no big deal. And then something was said about his height, and I'm like, oh, crud. He is.
I've got
really
a friend
tall.
like that.
Yeah.
It's a big problem. Literally.
So I have a queen size bed in my room, and I'm like, you know what? I wasn't gonna spend too much time on my room when I was cleaning up, getting ready for him. So I'm like, I'm gonna let him have my room, because it's gonna be a lot more comfortable for him to sleep in there. So yeah, I slept on the futon. That was fun. So yeah, and finals are finally finished. Yeah, now I can return this infernal networking book back to the pits of Hades. I mean, Amazon.
Throw it back into the warehouse from whence it came.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I'm just glad this class is over, to be honest with you. I am definitely, I think I told you guys this, but I talked to my advisor. I'm taking this semester off and just getting a mental break. I'm kind of stepping away from a lot of stuff and just going, all right, where do I want to put my focus? Because I've been stretched too thin this past semester. I knew I was getting myself into that because I needed that to get me out of the funk I was in at the end of the summer. But now I need a break from that, and I need to focus on, okay, what do I want to put my time and attention into? So
So you went.
that's where.
So you got out of the funk and went to the disco.
Oh yeah.
Saving money is hard, especially when you place bets on what kind of joke Will is going to tell.
Lucas Casares is a fee only certified financial planner. He owns and runs Level Up Financial Planning virtually out of Fort Collins, Colorado.
Yeah, and just like us here at Complete Developer Podcast, he has a focus on helping you to not only establish an actual real plan for what you're going to do, but to take action on that plan so that you can create the kind of life you want to live.
Yeah, guys, investing in financial planning services really comes down to whether or not you can improve your finances. With the help of Level Up, the compounding impact of making better financial decisions will easily pay for itself.
Level Up also has a unique pricing model that will help you no matter where you are in your financial journey.
And best of all, Lucas is a fiduciary for his clients. What that means is he's not there to sell you a product or to tell you you need to buy this or that, but he's there to help guide you. You pay for a service for him to guide you to a better financial situation.
And speaking of guidance, you can catch his podcast, Techie Personal Finance Boot Camp, where he covers financial topics you probably face. And he also interviews other tech people there who share how they navigated their careers. And finally, he also has even more stuff on levelupfinancialplanning.com.
Knowledge silos are very common in professional software development environments. They are a natural phenomenon caused by a variety of situations. Company mergers and acquisitions are one source of them. Another source is just having separate teams working on entirely separate projects that suddenly have to integrate. Knowledge silos can also be created when a company goes through a period of strong growth or decline. Regardless, knowledge silos are something you will encounter to some degree in every workplace.
And it's worth your while to do what you can to attempt to break down these knowledge silos when you see them. Not only do they often create extra work, but they can also cause, really subtle errors and even make it difficult to evolve your software to deal with changing conditions in the market. And that includes regulatory issues. Knowledge silos also reduce the resilience of your organization as a whole, making you dependent on a small subset of your team for critical functionality. Even worse, they can also introduce an us versus them dynamic in teams that would otherwise work well together because the blame for a problem is always the other dude or other chick's fault.
No. Knowledge silos are difficult to break down. You're not going to be able to do it in a day, nor are you likely to be able to do it during someone's 2-week notice period. Instead, they generally have to be disassembled over quite a bit of time while other work is still getting done. Like, this seriously requires some time, guys, because it's exactly the same kind of exploration of a new system that occurs when a new employee is hired. It's essentially a loop of being told things, followed by exploring and then asking more questions until the person is comfortable and familiar with that part of the system. Sometimes that doesn't happen until they've actually had to be in there and do stuff in it for a little while and ask their questions while working on it. You really can't rush this process.
Yeah, you can really think of it as sort of a refactoring of your organizational structure, right? Like, nobody who wants to not get fired tells the team to stop completely until a huge refactoring can take place most of the time. You do that slowly over time. Yeah, I mean, there's the occasional person that pulls it off, but for the most part, that's just not going to work. So in this episode, we're going to talk about some things that you can do to help weaken and wear down knowledge silos in your organization. In addition, most of these tactics have other more obvious benefits for your organization, which can help you a lot if you're not trying to do this openly. And this can be necessary as a result of office politics, by the way. So, this is not a neutral operation. While you may have a lot more leverage to remove these problems as a manager, even a junior developer can apply many of these tactics to reduce knowledge siloing in an organization. And best of all, many of these practices will also inhibit the growth of future knowledge silos.
So, guys, in the aftercast, we are going to talk about how knowledge silos occur and and how to recognize them in your organization. So let's go ahead and get started.
Yeah. So the first thing is obviously to start prioritizing collaboration between silos. These silos occur because you didn't, fundamentally. So, like, if the thing causes a problem, stop doing the thing. Like, it's common sense when you say it like that, but it gets missed a lot. A lack of collaboration will cause a knowledge silo over time. By definition, that means that you should encourage collaboration just to help avoid accumulating more knowledge silos, even if it doesn't break the existing ones down very well.
Yeah, I mean that's a big thing, especially when you start to go, "Hey, we have some knowledge silos." Before even starting to break them down, you have to stop the process that started them because you may be breaking down this knowledge silo while another one is building up.
Well, and you probably are, right? You're making two
Yeah,
teams collaborate, and there's a third team over here that's now completely shut out from what both those teams are doing.
yeah. When people from different teams work together, they obviously learn from each other. However, it also helps people establish work relationships that enable them to continue to learn even after the current task is done. And this is very important because I have seen this just like coming onto a team that did a very good job like of avoiding knowledge silos because they did have different teams. They like you build something and then you kind of move to something else with a different team and like they mix it up so that you get different people talking about different things to one another. But I have literally seen someone on one team go to a person on a different team for help because they knew that person was really good at that particular area.
Yeah. And that's kind of what you're trying to go for here. It also just makes any future collaboration easier, right? Like, people don't get comfortable with each other instantly. At least normal, psychologically healthy people don't get comfortable with each other instantly. And while in tech, sometimes we get accused of not being overly psychologically healthy. That's probably really not true at the level we like to joke about. But when you want to build a collaborative relationship, the goal is to reduce the friction of communication between different groups so that it's easier to do, so that they do it more. And
Mm-hmm.
this also helps in regards to keeping interpersonal relationships out of the mix. People, butting heads. They don't integrate stuff together often. They don't have to talk often, but when they do, they butt heads every time. Well, if you get those people talking on the regular, more than likely it either comes to a head or it smooths out, right? Like, it's not always going to be this oppositional thing. Like, it gets solved a lot quicker.
So, next, treat documentation as a first class output. I mean, honestly, this
Oh, I could make
this
a
is something
rant that would go longer than an episode
oh yeah,
on
yeah,
this.
same here. So, like unit tests, documentation is almost always an afterthought. And also, like unit tests, this is a really bad approach for long-term system stability. Even though you can move faster right now by putting it off. And I'll be honest with you, like, we're joking about the unit test. Just yesterday, I got excited because I finished something earlier than I thought I was going to. Like, it all went together, and I threw out the PR and I forgot to update my unit tests.
Yep.
And yeah, one of my junior developers, like, he was like, "Hey, your build didn't pass test." And I'm like, "Yeah, I know. I'll fix it in the morning. I gotta go." At the
Yeah,
end of the day, I'll fix it in the morning. I know what I did wrong. Thanks for catching it.
I've had the one where it's like, hey, you changed functionality and your unit test didn't break. And a junior dev called that one out. Said, dude, you know,
Yeah, that's good too.
that's you really do have to treat it as a first class citizen. We have this mindset shift that we need to undergo in tech, where the person using the system is not the only consumer of the system, right? Like, there's 4 or 5 other use cases, at least, usually, that are just as important and have to be maintained or things fall apart. right? Like they don't just build cars for drivers; they also build them for mechanics.
Well, talk to some mechanics and they'll say they
Although
don't.
there's one or two mechanics. There's a mechanic that just threw a wrench and probably a 10 millimeter that he's not going to ever find again. Who threw it and is like, no, they don't. But they theoretically should, right? You hate to work on those kind of vehicles that are where you got to take the whole front off to change a light. you know? Right? There's other consumers other than the consumer you think is there, and the knowledge silos really develop a lot because we forget that other teams still have to interact with the system, even if they're not the front end user. And it's really easy to forget your own coworkers because you think, oh, they know how I was thinking when I did this, or they, it's easy to assume knowledge that people may or may not have. And if you do it long enough, just the fact that you ignored documentation on its own will create a knowledge silo. Like that's the birthplace of knowledge silos right there.
Documentation also helps prevent organizational knowledge loss because of employee attrition. This sort of knowledge loss when someone leaves tends to produce siloing because the people who are left behind are overloaded with work and trying to recover that lost knowledge. And they're really not in any position to help each other or the new person coming on. I will be honest with you. I was very cognizant of this when I left my last job to take this promotion to lead in another department, because hey, we still work for the same company. We're still I still keep in touch with them. I actually had a call with my replacement the other day where he was like, hey, we're coming into this stuff that is, he's like, we've reached the end of your what you had mapped out, and now all I have is the design specs you did a year ago. Can we hop on a call and you can answer my questions? Yeah, that's no problem. But knowing this was coming, I was able to get everything ready so that when he came in, he just was able to step right in, read the code, read the documentation, and go.
Yeah.
I cannot say that I've always been that way. I'll just be honest. And I learned it the hard way to do that. So, yeah.
Well, and I think every time you feel like it could have been better, right? Like this is something you're never going to be like, yeah, I got this down.
Yeah.
It's just you stink less than last time. and that's exactly how you're going to feel about it when you die. Although hopefully you're not thinking about documentation when you go. I feel like I don't want Jira involved.
Yikes.
It seems like I drag it out a lot.
No, thank you. No, thank you.
So speaking of dragging things out, one thing you also need to look into doing is actually fixing your onboarding procedures. And I know this sounds like kind of managerial, but it's actually something junior devs can really, really help with a lot, because managers can't necessarily see what they're not telling you that you need to know, because they make assumptions that you can't make. So you have a unique place here. So this is why we put this in the list. Anytime a organization has rapid growth, turnover, or in a lot of cases, they'll have both, it's really easy to get a silo, especially if your onboarding process is not particularly good. Generally speaking, new people need to be able to quickly work in as much of the system as possible, simply so that you don't create a knowledge silo, because you get a new person coming in, they don't know some other piece of the system, some dude leaves, and that happens to be the last dude that knew that. Now there's a knowledge silo that no longer exists in your org, but the code does. This helps avoid that.
So if it's, just out of curiosity, if it's a knowledge silo and the person leaves, is that just like a knowledge pit?
It's a crypt.
It's a crypt. Okay. Because I'm like, it's like, there's not this one person who knows it. There's no one who knows it. So it's just this pit of nobody knows.
Yeah. It's a null reference exception for your knowledge base.
Oh, yes. I love those. Not.
Yeah. Well, you have to catch it.
Yeah. No. So that's why you can't cover everything in onboarding. You want to make sure that if someone gets stuck in a particular area, they know who to contact for help. That's very key. I mean, no joke. I've experienced this. Like I said, you know, what, 8 months ago? Have I been here for 8 months? Yeah, about 8 months ago is when I took on the role, the lead developer role. And there's stuff that just 2 weeks ago I had to reach out, and I knew who to reach out to help me with this because they did such a good job of preparing me. I actually went back and because I had to fill out some documentation and put in my hire date for this position. And I was looking at my calendar because, like, the week before I got hired, there's nothing on there. The week I got hired, it's like all full the whole
Yeah.
week. And some of that was literally like a 2-hour slot with our architect for setting up my machine. Of course, we got in there, and while we were setting up the PC, we found out, oh, hey, you're getting a Mac. Like, I had requested one, and like, oh, well, they have one for you, so you can pick it up Thursday. Oh, well, we're not going to set this thing up then.
Yeah.
Get me to where I can go to meetings, and that's all I need.
Yeah. Our organization does a pretty good job with this because they make the team leads meet and train people on different things. And so, like, you already know several people you can reach out to who are senior in various areas. And that really helps. It's the first time I've actually seen, at least in a very long time, where onboarding was done properly or done reasonably well. Like, it just, most places they just kind of go, yeah, once your machine works, we're going to start throwing stuff at you. And I don't think that helps them in the long term. I think they lose a lot more time by not doing this. That said, you need to be really careful during the onboarding thing because, like, you can't overload people, right? Like, you give them the fire hose, they're just going to shut down at some point. But what you also can't do is say, well, we're just going to cross train them later, because as a new employee becomes more and more competent and useful, or, conversely, they become less competent and then they get canned, they get to where they have less and less time available to learn new things, at least in most organizations, right? Like, your workload doesn't drop the longer you've been there, at least until you've been there a very, very long time.
So is next, to increase the scope of training sessions. When you have training sessions for your team, it's wise to try to open those training sessions for broader slices of the team than you think you're gonna need, basically. It doesn't have to just include developers. Other related jobs may benefit as well. When we started using Postman, I trained the developers, but I also pulled in the QA.
Yeah.
And like we trained them, but they weren't going to be using it until we had a project where they were. And while I still had to go through and do some retraining with them, it was a lot easier because they already had a basic knowledge of how it worked.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, you train your people so they can execute on something. You train people outside your group so that they can go, hey, what about this?
Yeah.
And that gets you, like, it increases the pipeline of really good ideas that come to you. So it's not just a knowledge silo thing. It's like you're getting a bigger farm for your silo to sit in. I guess is the best way. I don't know. I really can't take that metaphor anywhere else without it, ending up being, there's going to be a reference to cow droppings if I take the metaphor much further. So, yeah, expanding your training scope really, really helps. The other thing it does is that you reduce, you reinforce the notion that understanding certain portions of the system is not just a task for a single team, but that it's a whole team thing, and that team can expand quite a bit. One team might be better at a particular set of tasks, or they might be the default people, but allowing other interested parties to attend makes it a lot more difficult for silos to form.
Yeah. It also helps in other ways, such as when you have to train a broader team, you're not able to make as many assumptions about what the attendees will know coming in, which is good because it makes you do a better job explaining, which builds better training material. This was another thing that I ran into training our QAs on Postman is I found out that some of the UI devs really didn't understand how APIs worked that well. It was just a magic box to them.
Well, it is.
And, yeah. But I mean, this was more of the junior ones. who were, pretty new to the job, but still it was kind of like a magic box to them. Like they had done some in school, like in their boot camp, but and so it was kind of cool going through that and like explaining it the way I was explaining it to someone who wasn't a developer, to where they were able to, like, I actually had someone come up and say like, "Hey, that really helped me. I have a much better appreciation for what you do as an API developer." That was one of the other developers.
Yeah.
So, like, that was really cool.
So another thing you need to do, and this one is actually sounds easier and is actually harder than you might think, but you want to stop playing favorites, or, that's if you're a manager, or assuming that certain work is only for elite developers. So if you're a regular dev, in some environments, you get knowledge silos that aren't really created by lack of sharing, but it's a lack of trust, or by things like management protecting certain groups from having to share their knowledge for various reasons. While this does protect their time and attention in the short term, in the long term, it means that they're the only ones that can handle certain issues. And as they handle those issues, they accumulate knowledge that doesn't go out to the rest of the team.
Yeah. I mean, this is one of those things where I've seen this where it's like, oh well, only these people work on this system because they were around when it was built and so they understand it, and or like, oh, go to this person for this kind of story because they're really good. They can handle the tougher things. Don't telling junior developers not to take on difficult tasks. And there are times where it's like, hey, we have a time crunch, so I was like, hey, let me take that, and you guys grab this other thing. But right now, and most of the time, I encourage the junior developers on my team to take on the challenging tasks, partly because I want to see how far they can get on their own, but also because I know that my job is to help them. So I'm going to get to be a part of it either way.
Yeah. Well, and I mean the other thing with doing that, is that the junior developer has a set of perspectives that you don't.
Yeah.
And like I've legitimately seen them go in and go, okay, this is way too hard to understand, and come up with a simpler solution than a senior dev would have, that works just fine. And like you or I would just hack around it, or deal with it with the complexity, and a junior dev might go, okay, well, this just needs to be a for loop, and that's the extent of it. And they're absolutely right, and we can't see it.
Yeah. No, and that's true. I will say I do like one of the things is they try to keep the development to where anyone can work on anything.
Yeah.
And so there's some more complex stuff that I don't do because it's not necessary. It's actually made me a better developer from that,
right,
from that perspective. So
yeah, or at least like you cram it into a weird corner of the system where and isolate it so that most people don't have to deal with it.
Well, I mean, what happens is you still end up doing that complex stuff. It's just you only do it when you have to do it. You don't do it
right.
just because, oh yeah, this is, let me write this out in one line.
Yeah.
And you're like, all right, a 5-line loop would have been just fine and much easier to read than a 1-line link statement. Yeah. So anyway,
especially with a left outer join and all those. Things. Yeah.
All sorts of fun. Also, guys, like getting back to this point, members of a favorite team will be more reluctant to learn things from outside their team because from their perspective, the others aren't the favorites. At the very least, it's going to make them prioritize their own work over cross training.
And so you get a knowledge silo going in the other direction too. That's kind of the point. It's like there's never, it's kind of like saying there's never just one dysfunctional person in a dysfunctional relationship. There's never just one knowledge silo in a system of knowledge silos. There's always at least two.
Yeah.
The other thing with playing favorites is that it can also increase churn, which also creates knowledge silos and knowledge loss.
Yeah. Now, this sounds like it only applies to management. And I know Will said this a couple of times too already throughout this episode, because there's a lot of stuff that sounds like it's just management talk. But it's just as true if the team believes that certain people on there are the only ones capable of handling certain tasks. It's like I was talking about where I have seen teams that were like, oh, well, we just give all of those tasks to this person because, they're the senior developer. They're the good, like they can get it done. Whereas one of the things I really like about where I work is it's encouraged for everyone to take on harder tasks, including junior developers to take on more challenging tasks. And if you get stuck, you ask for help, and we train you through that process because that's how you're going to grow and get better.
Well, that's how you grow your senior devs too.
That's true. That's really true.
And you can't tell them that because they get they get cranky about somebody thinking they need to grow, but we do.
Oh yeah.
It's probably better for us than it is for them, honestly. For seniors instead of juniors.
Yeah.
It really helps us a lot.
So guys, next, communicate proactively. When you make changes to parts of the system, you should communicate to the rest of your team rather than just assuming that someone will ask you a question if they want to know something. And having to do pull requests kind of helps with this. While this won't necessarily mean that everyone gets cross-trained, it does at least provide the opportunity. And like I was saying with pull requests, we have, I know I Sean Connery'd it a little bit. We have, where am I going with this? You cut me off, man. What we do is like you have to have at least one other developer approve it, and we try to get we have a team of 3, as myself and 2 juniors, and we try to get all both of the other 2 to do it. But sometimes my head is so far deep in whatever I'm coding, I don't notice the PR come in. And I've told them, I'm like, guys, if I haven't done anything in within 5 to 10 minutes after the other approval comes in, just go ahead and complete it. It's not that big a deal. Now, if it's something that they're like, hey, we really want you to look at this and make sure we did it right, they'll I was like, send me a private Slack because it'll pop up on my screen and jump up at me. But the PRs, I can't get them to jump up at me. I don't know.
Well, if you're doing teams, it's really hit or miss because I miss mine all the time.
Yeah.
For the same thing, but
it's a pain, man. It is.
Yeah, I wish they'd get teams in order. It's about as frustrating dealing with teams right now as it was dealing with Windows 10 for the first year or so. You remember?
Yep, I remember.
Proactive communication also is really helpful because it forces you to document your work soon after you complete it instead of putting it off and then trying to reconstruct things from memory because your memory's crap just like everyone else's. It makes your documentation better because you're kind of closer to the problem when you're trying to describe the problem.
Another thing it does is that it helps with your more shy or introverted coworkers. They may be hesitant to ask questions. So if you start the discussion, they're much more likely to respond to an existing discussion than to initiate the conversation.
Yeah. And by the time they initiate it, they're usually kind of stressed too. So
yeah.
And the last point, you also need to make sure that you respect the time and attention of the people that are in the other silos. And there's a good reason for this because if you're constantly bugging them, they're going to tune you out.
Mm-hmm.
So while both asking for and giving help, you need to do it in a way that doesn't use up an excessive amount of time or create unwanted interruptions for the other party. Right. So this may mean going, hey, I know this person is a morning person and they work, really hard in the morning. I'm going to ask them this question after lunch. It might also be like, hey, just send them an email and let them deal with it when the time comes instead of, I don't know, calling them on Teams immediately when you get a question.
That's why I like Slack. We have Teams and Slack. Teams for meetings and then Slack for that and fun communication. You can't really have fun communication on Teams.
You could do private chats with your group. You
do private
make
chats.
Channel.
Yeah, but you don't get channels we've got, fun channels that you can, if you're sitting here waiting on a test, you can hop over and look at what people are posting in the gaming channel or the music channel or whatever.
We got a channel for our team and then we've got a private chat for the team. and the private chat doesn't have bosses looking in or whatever. And so if somebody's frustrated, it's also very, very helpful.
Yeah.
Because then depending on the level of frustration, they can pick which one.
Other thing this does is it means that exchanges of information need to be scheduled, time boxed, and should have an agenda. That way, both the person sharing the information and the person receiving the information, they get what they need with as little time wasted as possible.
Right. Like you don't want an open-ended meeting to discuss anything ever.
Mm-mm. No, you should always have at least an agenda.
Yep. An agenda and a time box.
Yeah.
You also need to be aware that you probably are, especially if you're discussing something complex, you're going to go off on tangents, right? So you don't go, hey, this will only take 30 minutes. I'll make a 30-minute meeting. If you think it's going to take 30 minutes, go, I'm going to give an hour meeting and then let people have their time back if we don't go off on a tangent.
Yeah.
And just kind of be cognizant of that, because when you cross train people, they ask a lot more questions, and it's questions that you don't think about. And these tangents can be really, really helpful for learning either other parts of the system or how other people think or whatever. And you want to give a place for those to grow. So, guys, knowledge silos are an inevitable fact of life in many, if not all, environments. And we could frankly talk all day about the things that cause them, but the real trick is knowing how to get rid of them when they happen. While they are advantageous for a while, knowledge silos eventually become expensive, risky for the company, and they can make innovation very, very difficult. If you want a long career in tech, one of the most important things you can learn is how to cross-train yourself and others to get rid of these. Doing so doesn't just eliminate knowledge silos, but it also makes the team more productive, more resilient, and more able to quickly innovate when changes occur in the world. That pretty much wraps us up. Beej, what do you have this week for us for tricks of the trade?
So, guys, just like we can silo knowledge that like prevents the organization or like hurts the team as a whole, you can also kind of silo yourself. And you want to be careful that you don't paint yourself into a corner with your own kind of training and knowledge base, because it's very easy to do if you're not careful about it. You want to have enough breadth of knowledge to be able to pick up on new stuff, but you don't want it to be so wide that you never get good at anything. Like, you don't want to be a hello world expert. You could be I've known plenty of people who, like, at that junior level, you do need to be like, you want to have your breadth of knowledge there, the top of your T at that junior level. And some people never dive into anything. They don't ever, like, they spend too much time there. And so they're just sort of stuck in this, I can do a little bit of everything, but I'm not really good at anything. And you kind of want to try to avoid that. Now, the other side of that same coin is, while you want to have enough depth in an area or two to be an expert, you don't want to have so much that you neglect learning other areas that may benefit you in what you're doing in that area of expertise. The way I think about it is, when I did my dive, I went into the C# API side, because when I started, I was Angular, C# and SQL. I mean, that's kind of what I did. That was my breadth there. And then I dove into the C# side, but I didn't neglect the other. I didn't put as much effort into it as I did the C#, but I still kind of kept up with the changes in Angular and things like that, so that when I did get this promotion to this lead, I ended up leading a team. Now we're doing both front end and back end, but when I first started, we were the front end team on a project. And so I'm coming from being like the, .NET Core C# guy, because I was the one who dove into that first. So I was the one who was the expert on it. Not really that I'm an expert, just that where I was at, I was. And I was going from that to now I'm leading a team doing front end stuff. So
Yeah, you never know where you're going to end up. And you do have to keep that balance. A friend of mine said that specialization is for insects, but generalization is for buzzards.
Yep. Makes sense. You need to be
either
somewhere
one of those
in
is
the
something you
middle.
want to be. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like I think I heard this in a sermon actually, but it's like you're driving down a road and there's ditches on either side. You go too far to one extreme or the other, you're going to wind up in the ditch. You want to kind of stay in that middle area there. So
If you dig through the ditches, you end up being Rob Zombie.
yeah. Anyway, that's pretty much all I got. Guys, check us in the aftercast. We're going to talk about kind of how silos occur and then ways that you can recognize them in your organization so that you can start making changes.
Stand by for Titanfall.
If you have a question or comment, please email us at neckbeards@completedeveloperpodcast.com. Our theme music is an excerpt from Stand By for Titanfall by Pure Bells, available on SoundCloud and licensed through Creative Commons.
For references, show notes, and extra tips and insights, be sure to check out the website at CompleteDeveloperPodcast.com. Help us make the show possible by supporting us on Patreon at patreon.com/CompleteDeveloperPodcast. You'll get extras, including a weekly aftercast where we discuss the topic of the week and bonus material with some of our patrons.
You can also follow us on Twitter at CompleteDevPod, like our page on Facebook, and follow us on Instagram to keep up with news about the show. Join the conversation anytime via Slack by signing up at slack.completedevelopernetwork.com. Thanks for listening. See you next time.